Hey guys, it's me, Rich. You almost weren't allowed to see any of this. For nearly 5 years, the government sat on more than 1,000 hours of January 6 body cam footage, over 1,600 videos, until a court forced their hand. And in the same week, a Trump-appointed federal judge permanently killed the prosecution of 4 Proud Boys leaders, admitting on paper that his hands were tied by the Constitution itself. What you thought you knew about January 6 is about to get a lot more complicated. And if you stick with me till the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why Washington fought so hard for so long to keep all of this buried. Let's get into it. All right, guys, welcome back to RPW Media, where we are MAGA first, conservative second, and Republican third, with the goal of bringing you the most honest news coverage of the day. Look, if you're new, like, subscribe, and comment, and thank you. So, let's talk about January 6th again, except this time it's not a phony congressional hearing with a predetermined conclusion, and it's not a libnut cable news panel reading from the same script they've been reading since 2021. This time it's a federal court document and a police department's own hard drives, which, if you think about it, is a pretty inconvenient way for the truth to come out. Inconvenient, that is, for the people who spent 5 years insisting there was nothing left to see. Start with the videos. The Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Police Department was just forced to release more than 1,000 hours of body cam footage from January 6th. It's 1,630 videos in total. And not because in government suddenly discovered a conscience of any kind. It was because Tom Fitton's Judicial Watch took them to court and he won. And here's the part I want you to sit with for a second. Almost 5 years after the fact, American citizens still had to sue their own government just to watch video that government officials recorded with taxpayer-funded cameras of a taxpayer-funded building involving taxpayer-funded police. The left will call it transparency. I call it a hostage negotiation. According to Judicial Watch, the footage became public after an April 2026 ruling in a Washington, D.C. Freedom of Information Act case. Judicial Watch filed that lawsuit back in June of 2024 after D.C. police flatly denied an August 2021 request for all of the body-worn camera footage from that day. And when a local D.C. court finally looked at the government's excuses, it wasn't impressed. The court rejected D.C. police's claim that it needed to blur and censor everyone in the footage except law enforcement, and it rejected the department's argument that producing the videos would cost more than $1.5 million. In the court's own reasoning, any privacy issues were minimal and were outweighed by the overwhelming public interest in disclosure. Now, why would anyone fight that hard for that long over footage they claim shows nothing but an open and shut case? That's the question nobody in the corporate press seems eager to ask. Because let's be honest, don't expect the major networks to spend the next several weeks combing through 1,000 hours of tape. They settled on their January 6th narrative years ago, and revising it now would mean admitting that they got it wrong. And in many cases, it could probably be proven now that they intentionally got it wrong. As one longtime observer of this story put it, the belief among a lot of Americans is that Democrats stole the 2020 election and then used the events of January 6 to shift the nation's attention away from allegations of election fraud, with the media focusing almost exclusively on a 2.5-hour riot while giving little or no attention to the fraud claims themselves, effectively helping Democrats avoid the scrutiny of those allegations. You don't have to take that as gospel, but you should ask yourself why more than 1,000 hours of evidence had to be pried out of the government's hands by a lawsuit instead of just being handed over 5 years ago. And we still have to wonder, did they turn it all over? Now, while DC police were losing that fight, a federal judge was closing the book on a different piece of the January 6th story entirely. U.S. District Judge Timothy Kelly, a Trump appointee, for what it's worth, granted the Justice Department's motion to permanently dismiss the case against 4 Proud Boys members, Ethan Nordean, Joseph Biggs, Zachary Rehl, and Dominic Pezzola. Now remember, this is the Department of Justice that asked for these to be dropped. Now this came after a federal appeals court had already vacated their convictions. Pezzola, by the way, is the man who used a stolen Capitol Police riot shield to smash a window, creating what prosecutors called the first breach point of the entire riot. Nordean, Biggs, and Rehl were convicted of seditious conspiracy. These were not minor charges, and now the case against all four of them is over permanently with prejudice, which means they can't be brought back up again. Now let's remember that Proud Boys started as a breakfast cereal eating male bonding group. In Oregon, where they have one of the biggest groups of men, members of the Proud Boys provide security at conservative events like prayer vigils outside. And an offshoot of that group has held free speech rallies to dare Antifa to try and shut them down. Overwhelmingly, the only violence committed by Proud Boys is if Antifa throws the first punch. If Antifa doesn't start the violence, there will be no violence. Try to tell that to the biased cable news freaks. Now, in light of this, storming the Capitol seemed wholly out of character for this diverse group. I mean, indeed, Antifa and their political kindred, in or out of government, have had to concoct ways to smear them. Antifa calls them Nazis, white nationalists, and fascists, tropes that have been picked up by the woke crowd throughout the country. It is a mindset that permeates the seventh floor of the FBI. The Fed's behavior during the lead up to the trial is also suspicious. As the Times reported, prosecutors argued that hundreds of pages of documents related to the FBI informants were neither suppressed by the government nor directly relevant to the case to the Proud Boys, but because all of the material remains under a highly restrictive protective order, it is not possible to know what the informants told the government about the Proud Boys' role in the Capitol attack or how that information might affect the outcome of the trial. Yet I happen to know, because I did a story on this several years ago, that one FBI informant who told his FBI agent debriefers after J6 that the Proud Boys were neither involved in any conspiracy to overthrow the government, and they were not there to do that day. He also told the agents that Capitol Police were giving the Proud Boys the thumbs up because they were grabbing people who were entering the building and pulling them out, telling them it was illegal to go in there. The informant later said that the FBI agents who were debriefing him, that they held him for hours on end trying to get him to change his story, but he refused. Now, here's what makes this ruling worth your time, though. And it's not what you'd expect from a judge who clearly did not want to be writing this opinion. Judge Kelly didn't pretend to be thrilled about it. In his own words, quote, because the decisions to issue the executive order and to abandon this prosecution, even after the government secured convictions for serious crimes relating to the attack on the Capitol on January 6th, are solely the executives. No one should mistake the court's granting of the government's motion for its agreement with those decisions. In other words, I don't like this, but the Constitution doesn't care what I like. The move traces back to President Trump's January 20, 2025 executive order commuting the sentences and issuing full pardons for former Proud Boys chairman Enrique Tarrio, along with hundreds of other J6 defendants. Kelly put it plainly, quote, there is little mystery about why the government is moving to dismiss this case or whether dismissal is in fact what the executive seeks. President Trump's views about the prosecution of those who attacked the U.S. Capitol on January 6th, whether those views are based on fact or fiction, are well known, as is his intention to extend clemency to them. Now, Enrique Tarrio, most people don't know this. He wasn't even at the Capitol that day. He was in a hotel in Maryland when the riot broke out. And then Kelly explained in pretty stark terms why he had no legal choice in the matter. He said, quote, indeed, it is hard to see how any course other than granting the motion in full could make practical sense. Denying the motion would not somehow revive the convictions that the Court of Appeals vacated, nor would denying it mean a retrial would follow, because the court lacks the authority to compel the executive to pursue a prosecution, full stop. But especially when an executive order explicitly requires that the government seek dismissal with prejudice. That's separation of powers, spelled out in plain English by a judge who clearly wishes he were writing about literally anything else at that moment. Now, to be fair to Judge Kelly, and this matters because I don't want you to think this was some kind of victory lap for the rioters. He did not let the moment pass without saying exactly what he thought of what happened that day. He called it an attack on the people, on Congress, and on the Constitution's mechanism to facilitate the peaceful transfer of power. And he added this: moving forward, if this nation's experiment in self-government is to last another 250 years, the American people, no matter their partisan preferences, will have to act together to preserve, protect, and defend that miracle through our constitutional framework. Why don't you push that burden on the people that stole the election? That's not a man letting anybody off the hook morally, guys. That's a man telling you the law and his personal opinion are very different things, and that only one of them gets to decide the outcome of a case. Now, Tarrio, for his part, wasted no time celebrating on X. He wrote, quote, "We took the worst they threw at us, the raids, the solitary, the lies, and we stood tall. Trump dropped the pardons, and now the rest is crumbling around us. Justice is served. Proud Boys don't lose. We win. This is our victory. Thank you, President Donald J. Trump, and all of you that fought for us." Make of that what you will, but put the two stories side by side for a second, because that's really the whole point of this video. On one hand, you've got a court forcing the release of over 1,000 hours of footage the government spent 5 years trying not to show you. On the other hand, you've got a federal judge, a Trump appointee no less, writing an opinion that says essentially, my hands were tied by the Constitution, whether I liked the outcome or not. Two completely different legal tracks, two completely different branches of a story. And somehow they're both pointing in the exact same direction. The official version of January 6th that got locked into place back in 2021 is no longer the only version left standing. So here's the short of it, and I'll keep it short. For 5 years, Americans were told the story was settled, the footage didn't matter, and the cases were airtight. Now the footage is public, and one of the biggest cases just evaporated on constitutional grounds in a court, on the record, in writing. That's not spin. That's not a talking point. It's a paper trail. And whatever you believed walking into this video, now you have more of the actual record to check it against than you did 5 minutes ago. And that, in a country that still runs on self-government, is a genuinely good thing. Sunlight has a way of getting in eventually, whether Washington welcomes it or not. I will put a link down to all the videos in the description below. All right, so tell me what you think in the comments below. I want to hear from you. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.